I'm Christopher Schoenwald, and welcome to Life as a show intently focused on helping people find their professional pathway by exploring and unearthing the details of jobs from around the world. Before we get into today's episode, I just want to throw this out there. I have a channel over on YouTube, Life as a ... which basically hosts highlights from these audio conversations that I have with these great guests. They typically run 10 to 15 minutes, and they're there to kind of present a different vantage point. You know, for people that aren't into audio, aren't into podcasts, but are still looking for career advice, ideas, help, all that great stuff, send them over to YouTube. Like I said, Life as a ... And if you do get over there, I would love that like or subscribe. I mean, it's the best way to let that algorithm know that the content is worth sharing and should be out there. So anyway, I do thank you for letting me plug this a little bit, but I think it's about time to get into today's episode. One of the coolest things about hosting this show has to be the level of insight which invariably bubbles up to the surface each episode. These wonderful guests I inexplicably am able to lasso into spending a solid 45 to 50 minutes with me offer up distinctions about their work, which I believe to be true gold when it comes to learning about certain professions or businesses. And take my guest today. He comes from the world of marketing and advertising, which unto itself presents a ton of different roles and opportunities depending on your interests, strengths, and perhaps most importantly, existing base of knowledge on it. So choosing a career wisely within this field can lead to true fulfillment. Choosing errantly can lead to frustration and possible dead ends. Well, on this episode, we're going to learn about some of these distinctions. Plus, you'll hear all about how my guest ended up in the ad industry and spending over 20 years doing it in the country of Japan. Beyond that, we dabble in topics not limited to secrets of staying on top of the latest ad trends, the potential impact of AI on the industry, and a bunch more. So if you have any interest in marketing and advertising, keep listening. I promise you'll come away better prepped and prepared for establishing your career in this space. Okay, well, let me more formally introduce him to you, and we can get this party started. Ed Thompson is a marketing consultant and the founder of Concept Design. Ed works with startups, ventures, and multinationals to improve their strategic planning, brand marketing campaigns, and team performance across Japan and the Asia-Pacific region. His clients include global brands, including, but certainly not limited to the likes of Adidas, Microsoft, Tiffany & Company, Vogue Japan, Gillette, Heineken, Johnny Walker, Nike, and several others. Now, with more than 20 years in Japan, he uses his fluent ability in Japanese to manage the varied challenges leading multicultural, cross-functional teams at all levels of global organizations, consistently delivering positive outcomes for corporate initiatives. Ed himself is active as an advisor and mentor to innovative firms through Founder Institute and ADP List, the Amazing Design People List. As an educator, he has instructed more than 2,000 people in corporate seminars as lead lecturer for graduate seminars at United International Business School, UIBS, and continuing education programs targeting working professionals at both Nikkei Business School and Temple University, Japan. And in addition to these corporate workshops he offers for strategic marketing, B2B and B2C, he has recently launched an online learning platform called the Concept Design Academy. It's a culmination of his years of individual coaching and training of marketing teams. Now, several of the topics we will cover in this episode are available as free downloads, so please be sure to check this out, and I will have links for all of it. So with all of this noted, I'd like to welcome you to my conversation with Ed Thompson. Yeah, so welcome to the program. How are you doing today, Ed?
I'm doing okay. I'm very glad to be here and join the illustrious lineup you've had so far of speakers.
Oh, man. Yeah, I might add, for listeners' sake, Ed and I go way back. I think I had a cup of coffee in the marketing and advertising industry way back in the day. And I think you were one of the very first people within my network that I was building up at that time. So yeah, it's been a while, and I'm really excited to have you on the program here.
Definitely so.
Well, I do have this first segment lined up, and it's something called Coloring Wikipedia. As my listeners know, it's a segment where I just read off a definition of something related to what the guest is all about. And the term that I went with here for you today is competitive advantage. So let me just read that off, and then perhaps afterwards you could comment. Sound okay?
That sounds great.
All right, so here we go. Competitive advantage. The term competitive advantage refers to the ability gained through attributes and resources to perform at a higher level than others in the same industry or market. Now, based off of all of your experiences within the field of marketing and advertising, all the hidden insights that you've accrued over the years and everything that goes along with what you've been doing, what would you say to that?
So, competitive advantage, the way that we use it in the world of business is a very technical term. I want to approach it from a way that people who are not so familiar with the world of marketing or business, you might be a professional, but you're not doing the mechanics of business. I want to explain it in a way that you can really understand how you can use it for yourself. And if you can use it for yourself, of course, you can apply it to whatever business or industry that you are in. There are really about 7 things that people like to look at when they are trying to discover competitive advantage. And that begins with looking at your strengths. And so a lot of people would associate this with a SWOT: strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. But it's not just that. There's a lot of things that are very, very subjective. For example, who are you trying to communicate to? Who are you trying to talk to? Your target audience or the segment that you are really trying to reach. Also, your competition, what are they doing? How do you compare to what it is that they are doing? And how do you expect to make a difference? Also, knowing what you offer. In business, we'd call that a value proposition, but it's as simple as, hey, I'm here and I have this, or I do this thing. And once you can understand that and communicate that, it is so powerful. It's so easy, so hard, but so powerful. And then how you can be innovative every 3 or 4 years, even for myself as a marketing professional, I have to reinvent myself. It's not easy. It is a process. It takes anywhere from 6 months to a year. And then the relationships that you build along the way, you strengthen along the way, and it must be said, you will still lose some relationships along the way as you innovate, as you change yourself. And lastly, this all winds up coming to one final point, and that is branding, brand awareness for yourself, for your endeavor, for whatever it is you're trying to do. How are you really, really getting that word out there in a way that it just sticks?
I love that. I love that insight there. And one of the things that stood out to me right away is just like breaking it down into simpler terms, for people to make sense. I think sometimes in professions, the semantics of it all, the dressed up fancy titles and concepts
Mm.
and theories can kind of scare people off or intimidate people. But at its core, like the way you just sort of outlined it, yeah, you're right. I mean, like you could apply the marketing principles, that are used between businesses on a personal level, just like that, or at least examine them through that prism. And I think it just, like I said, it simplifies things and makes it that much easier for those who are looking at it from the outside in to make sense of it all. So I really appreciate those insights right at the gate here. And this also might be an opportune time to learn a little bit more about you and your business. I mean, certainly off the top, I listed off, some details based on what you do and whatnot, but maybe you could fill in some of the blanks for listeners right now.
I have a marketing consultancy, and it focuses a lot on strategy and how businesses can approach the marketplace. We place an emphasis on the planning, thinking about what we should do and how we should do it before we actually do it. And there's a distinction between these type of strategic agencies like mine and agencies that focus on doing things, production agencies. And production agencies might focus in graphic design or commercials or a variety of things, but they're really focused on the doing part. And so I try and focus on the strategy and bringing in challenger brands into Japan. And so a challenger brand might be a brand that is doing very well overseas, but due to the complexities of the Japanese market, they might have sales channels that are okay, but they don't have marketing. Marketing might be going okay, but sales for some reason is lagging. And I focus in trying to link that all together. This is going to be a little bit of jargon, but I try and link brand activation, which is B2C, with channel engagement, which is B2B. And the ability to actually connect those two is really, really hard. As an example, over my 20-year career, I did not do that for the first 15 years. It was very hard to connect.
Yeah. Well, for one, I think in any market, that can be a major challenge. But within the Japanese market in particular, it's notoriously difficult, obviously based off of the cultural differences. And there's a bit of mystery to it all, I think, for those who aren't familiar with, the market dynamics and how, Japanese companies operate. There's a lot of complexity to it as well. So, I mean, yeah, that it certainly makes sense, again, based off of my own personal experiences in the market and, having conversations like this with people, such as yourself. One thing that stood out in listening to that, like based off of some of those difficulties, the love and the passion has to be there for this profession. I would think, like there's a lot to be learning constantly with this. You've spoken to this point of like constantly updating yourself and your visions and understandings of what's working in the market right now and what's flaming out, right? It's got to be, again, kind of driven by this, I don't know, passion for the work itself.
Well, let me touch on that. There are certain peaks and valleys that anyone in a career will go through. And those valleys, there's a lot of half-assing going on. And it could be because you are not able to keep up. In other words, the marketplace or the industry has changed around you. Your previous skill set, and when I say you, it's a combination of your soft skills and your professional or technical skills. And these things can get out of date very quickly, very quickly. And so, especially with your professional and technical skills, you have to think about how to update those all the time. But one thing that is very hard for you to change is your soft skills. And your soft skills involve your personality, your beliefs, and over time, your personalities and beliefs in action that defines your character. And so it is extremely hard to change that. So you have these two different things that are going on at the same time. And it's easy for a lot of people to forget that.
Those are really good points there. Yeah. Yeah. Those are ones that I don't think a lot of people would necessarily consider. Like, oftentimes, at least again, looking at professions or the ways of working from the outside in, you just assume it's like the technical skills that you're going to be deriving success based off of that and that alone. But you're right; it's these soft skills and how you're constantly evolving yourself as a person and how you're managing yourself in downturns in the economy and whatnot. Because those are certainly some factors that can change things up for you. But
Mm.
but I would like to actually step into another segment here, Ed, a day in the life, and perhaps we could, learn a little bit more about your activities themselves. Again, as I mentioned off the top, when I did get into the research for you, some of the things that struck me right away is the expansiveness of the services that you do offer. Obviously, the caliber of clients that you work with, but then also too, I mean, some of your own contributions, personal contributions, I might add, to other organizations and institutions, especially within the fields of education. So again, day in the life, how do you piece all this together? What does it look like for
When it's hectic, it is extremely hectic.
you?
So, one of the things about those of us who are on the agency side, a lot of our work is initiative driven, and we can't really control the timing of those initiatives. We do business development, we get the projects, and then we go. When we don't have these projects, well, we're in the process of doing business development, and that can change on a dime. A project which maybe we're very active planning for, pitching for 6 months ago, has been asleep. We pitched and the client said, well, we have to wait. And so we continue pitching, looking for new opportunities. And then, if we're lucky, somebody comes back all of a sudden. And that's actually really nice. The worst thing that can happen is two or three people come back at the same time. And then you have to figure out how to manage it all together because agencies can scale, but there are limits to how well you can scale. And so a lot of my time is spent reevaluating once I've pitched, and if there are things that are working, well, I want to keep doing that for as long as possible. However, if there are things that did not seem to work after a certain period of time, all right, well, maybe I messed up what I would call my positioning, where I want to be in the market and what I want to be focusing on. Maybe there is a boom for yellow roses, and that's what I have. And instead, the market has gone on to whatever, back to traditional red roses. That is a good way of explaining how services can change very quickly. Let's just think of the different ad tech services. I'm in digital marketing, SEO, SEM, CRM, brand experience, tracking, all these different aspects. They can come together or they can be requested in different ways by clients, and so it's a lot to keep up with. And so that's just the work side. The other side is academics. And so I've been teaching at Temple University here in Japan in their continuing education program for more than almost 20 years now.
Wow.
I used to
Wow.
say 15, and then I started to check and I'm like, oh, wait, that's a higher number now. And
Sounds
so
familiar. I hear you.
and so Temple University is one, but then I also have in the past few years been working with startups through different programs by the Tokyo Metropolitan Government, more recently by the Founders Institute, which is a global institute, but they have a chapter that focuses on startups here in Japan. And then also other different types of mentoring programs for people who are in the greater creative field. And it's actually all of these things in the latter part, the academic part, that helps me keep up to date more than the industry things because it provides a different perspective.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I think that's a really clever approach to, like you said, keeping up in that sense, because you are getting this different take on it all, like a theoretical sort of look at, what's taking place. And, obviously probably some scientific studies and research that's been, done on the industry or what's taking place. And it's just going to give you that added perspective on, what you're experiencing within the industry itself. This other question I have when I was listening to you speak about all this, and this is something that's come up with past guests of the program here, are seasons of work. And I'd be
Mm.
curious, if that is something that you experience, or like the way that you were just explaining it, randomly things are coming. You might hear back from a client, like you said, 6 months later after you'd initially pitched. Or do you have this sort of set seasonal aspect to the work itself?
I would say for myself and for larger agencies, you will get seasonality that you can predict when you have retained a larger client, and they will usually you'll get a retainer for a year, and that proceeds, it cycles over into the following year. When you have several larger clients like that, the seasonality analogy does apply. Otherwise, it's more about being on an ocean, and you can have a strong wind at your back and clear seas. You can have slightly choppy seas, or you can get swept up in a typhoon. And so different types of agencies deal better with different types of situations. Some agencies are very well built for the chaos of a typhoon. I'll put it like that. And it is part of the corporate culture. Other agencies will require smoother waters to do certain types of things. This gets back to the evaluation of not just an agency, but yourself. Where do you do better? Where are you a little bit weaker? Your strengths and your weaknesses. What is the environment in which you thrive? And so that seasonality aspect, we're all aiming for seasonality and things that can be regular. It is not so easy to achieve.
Got it. Yeah, really appreciate that insight here. I have another segment that I would like to jump into here, and this one's pathways. And you've spoken to this point already in terms of your time in Japan, just over 20 years now. And I think it'd be interesting for listeners to hear about, one, what brought you into Japan, but then two, like what attracted you to the field of marketing and advertising in the first place?
Okay, it will be a slightly long story that is compressed greatly.
Okay.
But I am from Dallas, Texas, and believe it or not, in high school in Dallas, Texas, a long time ago, they offered Japanese.
Really? Wow.
And
Okay.
so I started taking Japanese in high school in Texas. It shocks you, don't worry, it shocked me. And I took it because I had the option of learning several other languages that I had no expectation of ever being able to speak. I was not familiar with Japan, but it was much rarer. The language was much rarer than, say, German, French, Spanish, or the other options that were available to me. And so I just decided to take it on a whim. One of the things that happens in life is you don't predict certain things. And once I took that as an elective in high school, it became my elective in college. And so I just kept taking all these electives related to Japan. I had never been to the country. I wasn't that interested in, like, say, the martial arts. I was familiar with the world of anime because you could see it at that time on TV in general, but it wasn't something where I was just like, oh, yes, I want to go there someday. So, how'd I wind up here? I wound up here because I was at the University of Texas. I must have been a third year student. And they announced in one of the Japanese courses I was taking, we have a year-long program overseas in Japan. It's at this martial arts university. Who is interested in going? And nobody was interested in going. But one of my instructors said, Ed, you should do this. You should definitely do this. And on a whim, I looked at it and then I realized most exchange programs are only 3 months. This is for basically a year, 10, 11 months or something like that. And I'm like, that seems worthwhile. 3 months is not worthwhile, but 10 or 11 months, you could probably learn something at that time. And so I jumped at it. And that was my first experience on an airplane, flying the 14 or 15 hours from Texas over to Japan. That was it. It was just a leap of faith. And that set me on my journey. So that's the academic side. I'll pause right there. I'll pause right there if you have any follow-up questions.
It's not a question necessarily, but a comment. It's I think one, like having some courage to do that, and then also two, it's like this recognition of, again, you just never know where things are going to take you. These things that I think the word that you used was like taking these classes on a whim. Like you had no expectation that it was going to set you up your entire professional future, like having a business, living in a foreign country for over 20 years, all started on just this errant thought or doing something on a whim, and then just continuing to, I guess, walk through some of these open doors, and here you go. So anyway, it's just, yeah, not a question, but rather a comment there that you just never fully know.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with that. And then how did I wind up getting involved in advertising? Is I started out in advertising after I'd been in Japan for several years. I found a position in a production agency. And so I mentioned earlier that production agencies are focused on the doing of things. And this was a company that focused on making promotional tools, catalogs, websites, etc., for large Japanese electronics brands. And my position at that time was a coordinator. A coordinator was something that I discovered later would be called a project manager. Project managers get paid more. And so, but I come from that production side of advertising. And so checking schedules, making sure that things related to copy, to design, to color, to the actual printing, that they are being done on time and in sequence, that was really my strength. And so project management in the world of advertising is sometimes called producing. And so that experience as a producer is actually what carried me probably the first 10 years of my career. Because when things are very fast moving in the world of digital marketing, agency, events, etc., all of these different moving parts, you need someone who can coordinate and sync it. Who knows where all the moving parts are? And so that was my background, and that's how I started. But that is not considered a very glamorous part of advertising. It's very essential, but not glamorous.
And also, too, I think it raises this point of, for those who are interested in the field of marketing and advertising, some of the roles, certainly there's others than what you just listed there, but this idea of knowing who you are as a person and what your strengths and skills are in relation to some of these positions, and being a producer or more or less like a project manager, obviously skills of being organized, being on top of things. Those are things you're going to have, or if you don't have, it could be a painful experience for you. But if you're leaning more towards like the creative aspects, perhaps, like there's different roles for that also. So it pays to really investigate further the different, opportunities within the field of marketing advertising rather than just sort of walking into it all, blindly. I think that's something that could be valuable insight for someone who is interested in the field, generally speaking. I'm sure you'd probably agree with that.
I would definitely agree with that. And I'll give you another example of some of the battles that I've had to pick. So I started out with in print advertising. Print advertising is sometimes considered dead. It's not really. You if you walk out of your house, you will still find and encounter, hundreds of examples in any given day of print advertising out there in the world that you can see, touch, etc. But the world was moving into digital marketing. And so, in the world of digital marketing, one of the things that wound up happening, I'm producing and coordinating. This is a core skill set, but I'm learning how to do strategy in the world of digital because nobody knows how to do it. It is so new. Nobody knows how to do it. But at the same time, there are lots of different things that are also developing. I stayed on the creative side of digital marketing, but there was also an ad tech side. SEO, SEM started to become big. And this is one thing that I really don't focus on. I would always outsource this. I never went deep into SEO and SEM. And there are a couple of reasons about that. The complexity level, but then also I had a fear that I would invest so much time and build up and invest so much time and build up such a vast body of knowledge that would eventually become a commodity. And I could not deal with that. That was not a risk that I was willing to take. And for most people who are in the world of SEO, SEM, I think they would realize that there are certain things that, yes, that commodity part, doing more for less continuously, it is a grind that you don't really want to be on. And so this also relates back to the brand awareness or the branding for yourself or your company. What is the value that you are adding outside of the work? You really have to focus on that. And so there have been many things that I have leaped over while trying to stay relevant. And sometimes I get the timing right. Sometimes the timing is not so right. So it is a challenge.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I feel like we're starting to get into the weeds a little bit more about, the field of marketing and advertising. This might be a good opportunity to jump into this other segment of Q&A discovery. And as far as like basic marketing principles, I think, people who are listening to this maybe for the first time who don't know a lot about this field or this profession, it would be probably helpful to hear a little bit more about that. But then also too, I think it's interesting how some of these marketing fundamentals or principles can actually be used by you yourself as a professional in the field to advance your own career. And maybe you could share some insights on both of those ideas.
Well, I'd really like to touch on the topic of personal branding and probably circle back to self assessment again. And I think that most people nowadays, you understand that there are content creators, and you have this opportunity that if you can find a niche and do really well on certain social media channels, Instagram, TikTok, etc., that you can make a name for yourself. All of us probably have certain YouTube channels or individual influencers who we like, and we're proud of saying that we like them. And then those influencers that we like that we don't mention that we like. And so it works both ways. It works both ways. But now let's think about all of these people have personal brands. Well, what's your personal brand? And what's your personal brand in the context where it matters? If we're talking about you as a professional, your personal brand may only be relevant within your company or on a macro level, and on a micro level, within your team, the people you work with daily. And that should be the audience that you focus on communicating with and making sure that you understand how you can add value, for lack of a better word. And so this concept of the competitive advantage can actually be applied to that. It's not that you, quote unquote, want to crush your competition, unless that's just the way you do things, but you really want to focus on how the skill set that you have makes your team work better. And so that level of personal branding for most professionals is enough. They're not trying to be famous outside of their company. It isn't something that they are really interested in. And so these things together, it can help center you. Well, let's circle back to, say, the self-assessment aspects again. And so how you challenge yourself and how you remain aware of your skills and your mindset, you always have to reevaluate yourself. You always have to look at what you have been doing, but also how the world is changing around you. And so it is possible for your personal brand to become dated because you have not updated your soft skills and your professional skills. And with your soft skills, we talk about personality, character, and communication. With your professional or your technical skills, we're talking about abilities, your general range of knowledge, and your certification. And I want to, well, actually, I'm going to pause right there. If you have any follow-up or comments, and then I have one anecdote about certification that I think you'll find very interesting.
No, again, I like one of the comments that I would like to make is just again how you're relating these fundamentals from a B2B sort of standpoint and how this is taking place. Like brands are thinking about these things, their own positioning, I guess, within the market, their own image and what it represents, but also how this can be applied to oneself. And I like that connection there. It's such a unique angle to it all that I think it's helpful. Like I said, it's just helpful to listeners to hear this level of insight. So yeah, sorry, continue.
And so this aspect of certification, how it played out for me. And so after a few years starting my advertising career and being a producer, I felt that I needed to level up. And so I aggressively looked at different types of MBA programs or master's programs. And this is the time the internet was here, but the ability to do things fully remote was not a possibility. So you would have executive MBAs, you work 8 months a year, but then you spend 2 or 3 months on campus at some university somewhere. And so I looked at almost all the MBA rankings for a good 2, 3 years. And at the end of the day, I decided that it was not a fit for me.
Mm.
And so also keep in mind that my start in advertising, I did not have a background in marketing. This is not rare for people in the world of advertising and marketing. A lot of people have not studied advertising, marketing, or business, yet we work in a world of marketing and communications. This is going to be a very interesting insight for a lot of people who are out there. So I decided not to pursue that. Well, what did I do? I wanted, at the very least, to enroll in the certificate programs for continuing education at Temple University, but I was always too busy. But then, based on my professional career, I had the opportunity to start teaching one class in advertising at Temple University. And that has led to a 20-year career that is certifiable at Temple University. So this one thing that I wanted to take, I was doing. And after Temple University, I've taught at New York University's campus over here, the Nikkei Business School, UIBS, a school out of Switzerland, on the teaching graduate level courses based off my professional background. And that is the track record of the certification, which has allowed me to do that. And so I want people to keep in mind when we talk about certification, et cetera, it can be the practice of doing something diligently that is just as important as anything else.
That's terrific insight. I think that's a gem right now within this conversation that, I encourage listeners right now to be jotting that down because I think that can pay dividends in obvious fashion if you really fully adopt that approach. I do have this other question here to learn a little bit more about you and your services. Maybe we can transition into this other question about, maybe a case study, like as far as something that you've been involved in. I know in your website, you certainly offer a lot of different looks at the type of business that you're involved in. And you've already explained lightly, some of these aspects, but maybe you could share one of these things that you've been involved in, one that stands out to you.
Okay. I'll talk about the specialty of my agency again and this brand activation and channel engagement together. I call that BASE. And so we offer this to challenger brands, as I was mentioning. And what's the unique thing about these challenger brands? They have a good product, but it's not just about the Japanese marketplace. If you've ever worked in a team and you are doing something that is rather complex, lots of moving parts, lots of things can go wrong. Even the things when they are going right can seem like they're going wrong. And you have to figure out how to rise above that. Over the past 8 years, a specialty has been developed where for alcohol brands or liquor brands. And so I have helped launch different brands that have a great brand cachet overseas, but they need to learn how to fit here into the Japanese market. And one of these is a whiskey brand. And that whiskey brand, this is a very interesting story. In talking to the brand owner and hearing what they wanted to do and accomplish here in Japan, I thought I had the perfect brief. I am talking directly to the owner. We know what they need to achieve. And I plan and we start. And I discovered that the brief we developed together is wrong. How could the agency, talking directly to the brand owner, pulling together this brief together, how could you get this wrong? And it's a situation where everybody has hopes and dreams. And if you own a brand is your child, and you want your child to be more than whatever it is right now. It's the same as what any parent wants. And an analogy of this would be on premise, off premise. These are different concepts of how products can be purchased. On premise basically means bars, restaurants, etc. Off premise means you can purchase it in retail and take it home. We're strong in on premise. And so, of course, the brand owner wants to be strong in off premise as well, in retail. That's what I made the plan for because they're like, no, they're already fine here. We need to do that. Okay, well, in order to do that, I assume you have all the business operation side set up. It wasn't until we really got into the weeds of the operational issues because an advertising campaign can be put together for anything. An advertising campaign can help sell anything, but you have to have the business infrastructure to get that done. I don't do business infrastructure, so why would I bother with that? And I learned that our sales team that is extremely good for on premise has basically no experience in retail. So even if I built this beautiful campaign, we would not be able to activate it within the channel because we don't have those connections. They are just not suited for that. The brand is fine, but our actual salespeople can't do that. That was a revelation, and we had to pivot. And so I was looking at a B2C model to launch the brand, but we had to pivot. And to my great luck or very hard work, whichever way you want to see it, we were able to put together an incredibly successful campaign that did something even more unique, B to B to C. And so business to consumer, which is basically a dark art in advertising and marketing. We were able to put that together. For those of you who are interested, go to my website. You will be able to find the case study in the work section, and it outlines some of the top level things that went together with this.
Nice, nice. Yeah. I love it. And it also speaks to this point of, like you just said, pivoting. And I think like advertising has a lot of that sort of embedded within just the workflows. It's, fairly constant, right? Like clients want this and then they suddenly want that. And then they want to move this way, this direction. And what was relevant to them 6 months ago is suddenly not. I think that word, that pivot, is one that like you better become quite familiar with if you're entering into that space.
Yes, everything, what's the word? Everything is fluid. Everything.
Yeah, yeah, there it is. All right. Well, I have this other question here. The work itself, we've spoken about some of the challenges, certainly, and then obviously there's a certain level of reward and fulfillment that comes from it. But I'd love to hear this from you. Like, what do you derive a sense of satisfaction from in the work? Like, what really motivates you to keep going? Obviously, within this profession.
Well, I think this probably comes from my days in production. I find it slightly therapeutic to make order out of chaos and pulling together quite a variety of different elements in a way where the finished product, initiative, event, whatever you might call it, where it can be deemed a success is really satisfying. So that's on the work side of things. And then also on the academic side of things, as I kind of touched upon, that feedback loop that I get by teaching and instructing, it's not just one way. I learn so much from the students that I encounter as well. And for me, that really forms a a very powerful way of being. And it, of course, even when things change quite a bit, for example, COVID changed a lot for all of us. Online classes only in certain cases, you're no longer teaching in person, that direct physical contact where you could look at somebody there in the same room, learn things, et cetera. It had to be replaced with a different type of learning as an instructor, but also as a student.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, in the course of running this podcast here and speaking with so many different types of professionals, this notion of challenge and stress comes up quite often, obviously, but also too, like it is always connected up to levels of satisfaction and fulfillment. Like if things are super easy, they become mundane. And what does mundane mean? It means boring, right? That there's nothing there. Like that's where things, where people lose interest or they end up switching out of professions is because of that. And it strikes me as like your work in this field that you're involved in, I think you've mentioned a few times over, like you've constantly got to be updating yourself. Obviously being tied to technology with, the digital side of things. Like, geez, I mean, this day and age right now with AI and everything that's going on there, it is a constant re-education process. And like one, you have to be somebody who gets excited for that, I would think, but then also too, like recognizing and reflecting on the learning that is taking place and then finding fulfillment out of that. I think that's a key point as well. What would you say to that?
It's really interesting that you bring up the topic of AI. And so, for those of us in the creative field, there are many different impacts. People who are on the programming side or the design side, there's a lot of confusion because I don't want to get into what large language models and generative AI, how it actually has learned, but the output from these systems, it is getting better and better continuously. And so a lot of the work which people were hired for, just think about coding. Coding is a very interesting type of skill set. There's a lot of creativity to it, but it is code, it's not artwork. It's slightly different from, say, designers and the original artistic styles that, say, certain people have developed over decades of refining their craft. And so, for all of us now in the world of advertising, yes, this is a thing that we're going to have to learn about. We're going to have to learn how to apply it to our work. But if you ask me, Ed, are you really worried about AI and what it's going to do to the creative industry? My answer would actually be no. And it's a kind of counterintuitive reason why. As an individual, as a person, we like to think that we are unique. We like to think that we can curate certain aspects of our daily life or the life in general that we decide to lead. And that curation part is actually an expression of our originality. And this goes both ways. If we're doing it for ourselves, other people want to seek those same experiences from other people. Remember, we we're talking about influencers and content creators. Why do we look and enjoy at some of this content? Because they are doing something that is original that we find interesting. And those things can sometimes become quickly dated. There's a reason that TikTok trends will last sometimes only a few hours, a few days, etc. And so, this whole thing about striving for originality, I think the way that it will go is that people are going to start to demand a proof that this was done or this was curated by human hands. It's not AI. It's the same way that if you go to a wine tasting or fine dining and you learn about the complexities of pairings, tastings, etc., for the first time, that is not possible to emulate. I like a bag of chips as much as anybody else, but nothing can compare to actually homemade sour cream. It's going to be on that level where people no longer have to worry about the basics of things. They have to worry about that refined output, and they'll judge more and more, not on the 90%, because, well, it's 90% done, AI did it, but on this 10% that guarantees authenticity, that is going to be a very, very big deal.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I often think about this too, in the sense of like imperfection, kind of redefining that and it almost adding some degree of value in a sense, and in a strange sort of perverse way. Like the imperfections become something that you do want to seek out a little bit more, because if everything is just like perfectly put together, it becomes sterile, it becomes cold, like no personality. It doesn't connect because it's not necessarily reality. It doesn't reflect the human experience so much anymore. At least that's kind of my take on it. And yeah, I think that sort of plays into perhaps what you were referring to as well.
No, I think there's a lot of overlap, and we can use arts and crafts like pottery as an example of that. Fine porcelain is crafted in a very uniform way, that the material in some ways defines the output, but there is also a lot of organic pottery that is out there. The shapes are very unique, and especially here in Japan, you find this appreciation of these organic shapes. That is the artistic expression. You can fake these organic shapes to a certain extent, but I think that, again, what people are going to start demanding is that proof of origin from human hands or human thoughts. And on that note as well, the art of fixing broken pieces in Japan, kanetsugi, and so especially that relates to pottery as well, you would not expect to have an AI or a robot repair something like that. That is a purely human endeavor to take something that is broken and to fix it in a way that is artistic. And I think that speaks a lot, not just to, say, Japanese culture and the Japanese soul, but the greater aspects of what makes us human and what we can appreciate.
Yeah, yeah. There's one more point that I'd like to add onto all of this. Not too long ago, I had an emerging technology specialist on the program. She's a consultant, and she lives on the edge of all sorts of tech and advises on it. And she was mentioning about, this fifth industrial revolution that we're going to be getting ourselves into very soon. And she argues that like this notion of AI, what it's going to be doing across industries is, of course, improving efficiency. And using AI as a tool in that sense is going to be obviously helpful. It's going to transform a lot of industries. But in doing so, it's really going to put a premium on people who have like creativity skills or imagination, like these types of soft skills, and are able to kind of like translate ideas into products or services while AI is off in the background, doing these mundane tasks of data entry or things that, up until this point have stolen away a lot of our time, when we could have been doing these other things. And within the field of marketing and advertising, especially on the creative side of things, I could certainly envision this taking place perhaps, or, upping the ante a little bit, or making people really focus on these softer skills to succeed, really. I'd be curious what your take is on that.
I would definitely agree with that. And so we start thinking about what is the value that humans can provide. It is, quote unquote, the human touch. The essential thing about the human touch is communication. And so the chat bots that are being developed are becoming very well at mimicking certain types of responses. And for most mundane tasks or even certain types of entertainment, AI might be fine. But when you are looking for something that touches you in a very unique way, this is the reason why we have certain artists who are popular over certain generations. There's always a wave at that ebb and that flow, the peaks and the valleys, for what makes us tick over the course of our life and what makes a society tick as that society moves through time. And so communication is always going to be essential. I think if people really want to future proof themselves, then what they should really focus on is something that combines creativity and communication. Advertising is ideal. As I was saying, you don't need a degree to start advertising for people tomorrow. People will always need help being better communicators. And yes, you could plug it in the chat GPT, but how are you going to verify it that it is good? It's always good getting that second opinion, and you would like to have that second opinion from somebody who is a professional on those things. And I think that a lot of value is going to move to that area, exactly as that expert said. And it's going to be something that people want to focus on for themselves. How can I really brush up on my soft skills? But even though you're brushing up on your soft skills, you always have to think of who would be interested in this, because there are going to be different categories of people in the future who are interested in that, different types of companies. And that's really what you want to keep your eye on the ball for.
Yeah, that was well said. Now, that might be a nice note to draw things to a close here, Ed. But I've got to say, it feels like we just got started in this conversation. We've just blown right through it. Two, I think like the insights and the amount of like takes that you've provided for people and things to consider, things to research for themselves if they are seriously interested in getting into this field. Yeah, plenty to choose from again within this episode. So big thanks to you for taking some time to join the program.
No problems at all. And I would like to mention to everyone that I have a variety of free worksheets and workbooks that are downloadable for my online learning platform. I'm really interested in helping and assisting individuals and marketing teams become better in this world of advertising and communication. So be sure to check the links for these downloads. And if you're interested, see if your bosses or your managers will support enrollment in the online platform. I'd love to have you there.
Awesome. Be sure to have all those links in the show notes. Okay. Well, thanks again, Ed.
All right. Thanks a lot. This was my pleasure to be here.
Now, for those interested in learning more about Ed and his work, you can do so via his company website, conceptdesign.io. You can also find him on platforms like LinkedIn and Facebook. And for reference, I will have links for all of these in the show notes. And I mean, hey, if you enjoyed today's show, please be sure to tell a friend and share. To show further support, you can always rate, review, and subscribe wherever you access your podcasts. And then lastly, as I mentioned off the top, I do have that YouTube channel which hosts highlights from these audio recordings. If you make it over there, I would love that like or subscribe. And finally, don't forget to join us on the next episode of Life as A, where we'll continue to explore and unearth the details of professions and the people behind them. I'm your host, Christopher Schoenwald. Until next time, stay curious about life and living.